The afternoon sun blazed over the marble pool deck of one of the most expensive estates in the county. Guests in linen suits and silk dresses stood frozen, their champagne glasses lowered, their conversations dead in the air. A woman, still dripping, still trembling, stood at the edge of the pool. Her blue maid's uniform clung to her skin. Her white apron floated at her feet like a surrendered flag. She had been thrown in, literally thrown. And the man who had done it, the man who owned every inch of this property, every chair, every blade of trimmed grass, stood with his chest heaving and his jaw set tight, daring anyone to say a word. And then, from across the yard, a small boy came running. He wasn't walking, he was sprinting, his sneakers slapping the stone as fast as his little legs would carry him, tears already streaming down his face. He crashed into her arms. He buried his face into her wet shoulder. And in front of the guests, in front of his father, in front of everyone, he looked up at her and cried out the only word that had ever made him feel safe. "Mom." The crowd went silent. The man's face cracked open like stone under pressure. But how did a poor maid end up here? How did she come to mean everything to a little boy whose father had just tried to take her away? Let's go back to the beginning. Her name was Dorothy, Dorothy Mae Williams. She was 43 years old, and she had the kind of face that looked like it had learned a long time ago how to carry pain without showing it. Every morning, Dorothy woke before the sun touched the sky. She dressed quietly in the small room she rented in a part of town where the streetlights sometimes didn't work. She made her coffee in a pot that took 3 tries to start, and she sat for exactly 7 minutes at her small kitchen table, because that was the only peace she was going to get for the rest of the day. Then she packed her bus pass, her extra pair of shoes, and whatever was left of her sandwich from the night before, and she went to work. Dorothy had been cleaning houses for 22 years. She had raised her own daughter through those years, alone after the accident that took her husband, scrubbing floors and washing windows and ironing other people's shirts so that her daughter could go to college and become something. And she had. Dorothy's daughter was a nurse now, 2 states away. Dorothy kept a photo of her in her apron pocket, close to her heart, always. She had started working for the Harrington household 8 months before that afternoon at the pool. The estate belonged to a man named Richard Harrington. He was 51. He had the silver hair of someone who had aged well and the cold eyes of someone who had forgotten how. He had made his fortune in real estate, buying buildings, raising rents, replacing people with profit margins. He was not a cruel man in the way that movies show cruelty. He was precise, efficient. He moved through the world like everything in it existed to serve a function, and anything that didn't serve one needed to be removed. His wife had left him 2 years prior. She had left quietly and taken almost nothing, except her heart, which had long since stopped beating for him anyway. What she had left behind was their son, Marcus, 7 years old, with big brown eyes and a laugh that sounded like someone had hidden bells inside him. Marcus was the one thing in Richard Harrington's world that he did not know how to manage. From her very first week, Dorothy had noticed Marcus in the way that people who have raised children notice lonely ones. He wasn't a loud child. He was quiet in the specific way that children become quiet when they've learned that making noise doesn't bring anyone. He sat on the stairs while she cleaned and watched her with wishing, wondering eyes. The first time he spoke to her, he asked if she needed help. She looked at that small boy carrying a mop he could barely lift, and she laughed, a real laugh from somewhere deep. And she said, "Baby, I would be honored." That was how it started. Over the weeks and months that followed, Marcus became Dorothy's shadow. He helped her fold towels. He kept her company when she cleaned the empty east wing of the house. She told him stories about her daughter, about her husband, about the neighborhood she'd grown up in, where everyone knew your name and left food on your porch when times were hard. Marcus listened to every word like she was reading from the most important book ever written. And she listened to him too. About school, about the friends he wasn't sure liked him, about how sometimes at night he heard his father pacing the halls and he didn't know what to do. Dorothy didn't try to fix any of it. She just listened. She just stayed. Richard Harrington noticed the closeness and said nothing at first. He told himself it was harmless. He told himself a boy needed company and the maid was simply doing her job. But as the months went on, something underneath his polished surface began to shift. He would come home to find Marcus laughing at the kitchen table with Dorothy, the smell of something warm and homemade in the air. She had started making biscuits on Fridays from her grandmother's recipe just because Marcus had asked her to once. He would see his son reach for her hand in the hallway. He would catch Marcus whispering something to her and Dorothy whispering back. And there was something in those moments that felt like an accusation he couldn't quite name. Richard was not the kind of man who examined his feelings. He was the kind of man who acted on them before he understood them. He started finding fault with Dorothy's work, a smudge on the mirror she had missed, a corner of the rug that wasn't perfectly straight. He spoke to her in clipped sentences, barely meeting her eyes. Dorothy took it all with the quiet dignity of a woman who had spent her whole life being underestimated. She said yes, sir, and of course, and she went back to her work. And on Fridays, she still made the biscuits, because Marcus still asked. But then came the afternoon of the summer party. Richard had arranged a gathering for business associates, a carefully curated showcase of wealth and connection. The pool sparkled. The catering was immaculate. Dorothy had been working since 5 in the morning preparing the estate. She was not supposed to be near the pool during the party. Her instructions were clear. Stay to the interior. But Marcus had wandered outside, and when a younger guest accidentally bumped him near the water's edge and Marcus began to panic, he couldn't swim well, something no one but Dorothy seemed to know. She had rushed out without thinking. She pulled Marcus back. She steadied him. She held him close while he caught his breath. And Richard saw it. He saw it from across the yard. He saw the guest turning to look. He saw his son clinging to the maid. And something broke loose and ate him. Something ugly and old. And before his better judgment could catch up with his rage, he had crossed the yard, taken Dorothy by the arm, and in front of every single person there, he had pushed her into the pool. "You were told to stay inside," he said, his voice ice cold. "Collect your things. You're finished here." Dorothy surfaced slowly. She didn't scream. She didn't cry out. She gripped the edge of the pool and pulled herself up with the same quiet dignity that had carried her through 43 years of a world that never made anything easy for women like her. She stood. She dripped. She breathed. And then the sound came, sneakers on stone moving fast. Marcus ran to her before anyone could stop him. He threw himself against her soaking body and held on like he was holding on to the only solid thing in a world made of water. "Mom," he kid. Just that one word. The silence that fell over the party was total. Not a glass clinked, not a voice rose. Every eye moved from the brush to the woman to the father, and in Richard Harrington's face, something the guests had never seen before appeared. Something raw and unmade. Something that looked terrifyingly close to shame. Dorothy wrapped her arms around Marcus, slowly, gently, the way she had wrapped them around her own daughter 1,000 times. She pressed her lips to the top of his head. She whispered something no one else could hear. Later, a guest who had known Richard Harrington for 15 years would say that in that moment he looked like a man who had just understood something, but far, far too late. He did not speak. He simply stood there while his son held on to the woman he had just tried to throw away. What happened in the hours after that party rippled outward in ways Richard had not anticipated. 2 of his business partners quietly excused themselves. His housekeeper of 6 years gave her notice the following morning. And his son, for the first time in 2 years, refused to come inside when his father called him. Richard Harrington sat alone in his enormous house that night, with all its spotless rooms and its straight rugs and its smudge-free mirrors. And the silence was something he had never quite felt before. Not quiet, not peaceful, just empty. He called Dorothy 3 days later. She didn't answer. She was on a bus, heading to see her daughter, the nurse, 2 states away, with a suitcase and a biscuit recipe folded in her pocket, and a photograph of a small boy with big brown eyes that she would keep close to her heart for the rest of her life. Marcus left a note on her pillow before she'd packed. She read it on the bus in the blue early morning light, and she pressed it against her chest and closed her eyes. It said, "Thank you for staying when nobody else did. Some people walk through the world giving everything, and their time, their warmth, their quiet and endless care, and receive almost nothing in return. They are overlooked in rooms full of people who have more. They are dismissed by those who measure worth in money and status and the size of a home. But children know the truth before the rest of us are willing to admit it. Children know who loves them. They always know. And sometimes the person the world treats as least is the one quietly holding everything together.